Like it's 6:30 to me on the clock that I'm looking at there on the wall, or maybe even a minute or so after. Call this meeting to order and ask for the roll, please.
Eisenman,
Here.
Furtado, Goss,
Yes.
Patterson,
Here.
Petrie,
Present.
Quisenberry,
Here.
Esri.
Here. Thank you. I know Stephanie said she wasn't going to be here, and yeah, and I'll just take this moment to welcome Mr. Quisenberry and Ms. Eisman to the committee. Move on then to approval of agenda and addenda. Moved by Mr. Goss, seconded by Kyle. Is there any discussion on that? Changes? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you, that's approved. Move on then to approval of minutes from the ELEC committee meeting August 9th, 2018. Moved by Ms. Petrie, seconded by Kyle. Is there any discussion on that or corrections that need to be made?
There's some misspelled names here, and I can't remember where it's at. I read it online, and I can't.
I think it's his job to actually nitpick the. That's usually his.
Yeah, I know. You should have.
Hmm.
And maybe it's for the call next week, so.
You've read those already?
You know I'm always ahead of the game.
Yeah.
Mr. Patterson, I'm sorry, I just have to blank it out.
When you're in the car, you're supposed to have both hands on the wheel.
Oh, you're not supposed to read your board minutes?
Hmm.
Maybe it's not. Maybe it's.
Okay. We could maybe look for them a little bit, try and scan them, but. Give you another minute here or so to see if you can find it,
Is it
Jim.
under 9 by chance? Page 3? Are you thinking like that?
Yeah, Mr.
Top of page.
They think the public good will probably be maintained if we don't find it.
Nah, we'll, okay, well, not finding that. Any other changes, additions, corrections? Seeing none, all in favor of approving them, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you, that's approved. We'll move on then to public participation. I have two slips up here. I have, I guess, first, Mr. Christopher Soppett. If you want to speak first, or does Mr. Michael Burkowski want to speak first? I know you're on the same topic, so go ahead. And just ask that you sit at the table, and it's being recorded, so for the public, and then if you can turn on the microphone, please. There you go. Thank you.
My name is Mike Borkowski. I represent Community Power Group for case 894-S17 and 18, which are two community solar gardens. I believe these are the first two community solar programs that are going through the board. Wanted to make myself available for any discussions that you may have as it relates to community solar, and any questions about the technology, locations, and everything like that. So you'll see there are a couple waivers that are being requested. For the most part, they are administrative waivers, not true kind of project waivers. For both projects, there's a waiver for not providing a decommissioning and site reclamation plan. We actually will be providing them. We're just not doing that in connection with the upfront permit, because we won't actually know the actual equipment and costs, final layout, final everything, until we are ready to pull the building permit, which is a fair bit further down the line. That's number one. And then number two, all these projects, generally speaking, have like a 1 in 10 chance in being selected by the Illinois Power Authority. And so there is a fair bit of a cost burden to do that up front, just for this initial permit process, for something that would have to be done later again anyway. prior to the building permit. So administratively speaking, we're just asking that that be pulled, provided prior, and, come back here prior to pulling a building permit. The second one is for not entering into a roadway upgrade and maintenance agreement. A very similar scenario, except this one we actually are in communication. We have a verbal from the roadway commissioners as it relates to getting those agreements. We just haven't received the final forms. Prior to receiving a building permit, we will absolutely have those forms. And then the last one was just there's a waiver of being within a half mile of St. Joseph's. That we're asking to be a fair bit closer. The reason we are doing that on the St. Joe facility is literally, I don't know that there is a better solar location in the entire state. On this particular parcel, there are 2 gigantic cell phone towers, there is a substation, and there is a shooting range. And so there is very limited future development opportunities on that particular parcel. The landowner and ourselves have worked very closely with the shooting range to ensure that they can continue their operations there. So the solar facility actually works around them. So they actually see it as a benefit to themselves being able to secure the longevity of the shooting range. Because if somebody wanted to develop a residential neighborhood there, that would obviously potentially run in conflict with the shooting range. So anyway, very quick, just wanted to give a quick summary on those waivers and let you know that I'm available for any questions or thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Burkowski. Yeah, I'm sure the committee will probably have some questions for you when we get to that item on the agenda. Mr. Soppet?
Hello, my name is Chris Soppet. My wife Erin and I are here together. We're the landowners on the proposed project, and I just wanted to let the committee know that being the Environmental Land Use Committee, let you know that we take environmental stewardship seriously. We wanted to make sure that this project would be either neutral or beneficial for the use of the land. When you think about what we're doing with the farming operation, which I should mention my wife's family has done for 5 generations, really the farming operation is just a harvesting of energy. We're pretty much supplying ethanol and feed grade materials, so we're outsourcing energy to agricultural, to cattle basically, and to our travel in this country, and we see it as a more efficient way of adding energy to our country's needs. We're harvesting the energy of the sun in a different way, and they're doing it more efficiently because they can pay us more than what we can earn farming it. So obviously they're getting more energy than we are. We thought of it that way. Also, we were very concerned about whether there'd be an impact on the neighbor's land as far as drainage goes. We looked into it quite a bit. The lease that we signed is actually very detailed in terms of repairing any drainage tile that would be damaged and cause any type of drainage issues. There's also the added benefit of a perennial land cover that will be covering the ground, which will do a better job of absorbing excess rainfall than what we've got there anyway. So we think this is actually going to be good for the drainage in the area as opposed to impacting it negatively. I'm not going to be able to answer any of the technical questions that you'll have. Those will be for Mr. Burkowski, but if you have any for me that pertain to the landowner's perspective, I'd be happy to answer those.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Have no other slips. Anybody else care to participate? Don't see anybody jumping at the opportunity, so we will close that and move on then to communications. Are there any communications? Thank you, Tammy. Any communications from the board or staff? Okay, yep, go ahead, Susan.
I attended the October 1st meeting, which is the third information item here on this agenda, and I have an excellent handout that I'd like to distribute.
Nope, go ahead.
We'll
Yeah.
do that.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, seeing no other communications, we'll move on then to item 7 for information only. We have the residential electronics collection update, but we'll give Ms. Monty a few minutes here to get back to her seat after she passes these handouts out. Not trying to rush you, Susan.
Thank you for your patience. Just a quick reminder that the registration for the upcoming residential electronics collection next Saturday is still open. If there are people you know that have televisions they need to get rid of, this is a good opportunity. All they would have to do is call at this point, the number given. Also, I wanted to get in front of the board our interest in locating a facility of approximately 4,800 square feet, covered facility, to serve as a program collection site as we explore less expensive options for future collections of residential electronics. So I wanted to get the word out there that we are starting a search for a facility of that size. It doesn't have to be heated, just protected from the elements, and it doesn't have to be a long-term commitment at all. Could be month by month, year by year. And so that will occur over the next 3 months because of an upcoming opt-in deadline of January 1st. All we would need to do is identify a potential facility and then work out whether or not it's even cost-effective to proceed. So it's not a firm commitment. We just need to opt in with that option. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Discussion on this topic. I guess one question I have, Susan, do you roughly how many openings are left for the recycling? Do you know?
Okay, as of today, we have 1,643 participants registered, and we have approximately 1,900 spots available. Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like there's still a fair number of spots. So yeah, if you have something to bring in and are in one of the participating municipalities or in the unincorporated county, well, get signed up and bring it in and get rid of it for free, other than your little bit of time and effort and maybe some gas money. Go ahead, Ms. Petrie.
Have you had a chance to consult with any other communities or counties just to ask the question, have we peaked out and now we're sort of on the downward curve? You and I have sort of explored that possibility that people had saved things in their basement and got rid of them, and now it might not be as heavily used.
We expect that 82% of all the persons that register actually show up. And so it's even a lesser number, just as our experience over the recent collections has shown us. All information that I receive, and I'm looking forward to a fall conference where people around the state will consider that very question. Are that 5 years still a projection of how long televisions will keep on coming in, the cathode ray tubes?
Further discussion? Seeing none, we'll move on then to B, Muhammad Aquifer Protection Task Force update. Ms. Monty again, thank you.
I wanted to provide this very quick update with the next meeting date of the Muhammad Aquifer Protection Task Force as being October 15, that's a Monday, and that will be at the First Christian Church in Decatur. And so usually IEPA places the public meeting notice online like 2 or 3 days right before the meeting. So this is just a little heads up, advance notice about that meeting date and location. At the last meeting, one of the subcommittees completed their work to identify the top 9 potential threats to the Muhammad Aquifer, and so they developed summary statements and descriptions about those, and those are listed here in the notes. Included on that list are household hazardous waste, improperly sealed or abandoned wells, road salt, and a number of other, 7 other items, 2 or 6, to total 9. So they do still, the committee still does expect to complete its report by the end of December. And so the report will include a state plan to maintain the groundwater quality of the Muhammad Aquifer and legislative recommendations for future long-term protection of the aquifer.
Thank you, Susan. Discussion on this, Ms. Petrie.
Okay, Susan, would you mind just putting those together in a list and sending them to ELOC so we...
Actually, I'm waiting for the list to be placed online.
Oh,
These are from my
okay.
notes.
Well, if you'll
Yeah.
just let us know when it is
Yeah,
up
it's
online,
still
that'd be great.
draft minutes that have not been approved or released, kind of information. So
Okay, thanks.
I will do that.
Further discussion? Seeing none on that topic, we will move on then to C, update on state permitting of Dynegy coal ash pits along the Middle Fork River. Ms. Monty again.
Well, I thought it would be of interest to this committee since it was last February that we talked about the status of the review of the coal ash along the Middle Fork River in Vermilion County. And so now there's new information. The Army Corps of Engineers has decided to review the permit as an individual permit instead of a national permit. And so that kicks it into another realm of review and opportunity for public input. And I went to the October 1st meeting this week at the Champaign Public Library, and I wanted to make sure you had the very excellent materials that have been prepared to summarize the new opportunity for public input to protect that important Illinois resource. It's a scenic river. And what you can do, all the information you would need, the key points, and the significance of this different review type of an individual permit versus a national permit. So it's all there, and at your convenience, I would recommend that you take a look at that.
Okay, thanks again, Susan. Discussion on this. Ms. Petrie.
So clarification question. Are you indicating that this is a positive move in the sense that it will draw more attention to this issue and cause more people to get involved? And
Okay. To respond, yes, this is a good news kind of thing. It does provide a more careful look at what's being proposed. It's not a very automatic review at all, like it previously would have been or could have been. And so there's some concerns still expressed by the activists, the eco-justice collaborative activists, that the Army Corps of Engineers may choose to not do this as an individual permit after all, so they want to keep the pressure on, and that's why I distributed the goods. And you could just do a really quick form letter to the Army Corps of Engineers. There's a form letter provided to you, and that would just keep the pressure on them to continue to consider this as an individual permit.
Further discussion? Seeing none, thank you for those updates, Susan. We'll move up then to Section 8, items to be approved by ELUC. We have A, the annual hotel motel license for Urbana Motel Incorporated at 1906 North Cunningham Avenue, Urbana, for September 13th, 2018 through December 31st, 2018. Is there such a motion? Moved by Ms. Petrie. seconded by Mr. Goss. Discussion on this. I know Mr. Hall said, yes, this is late, but we did at least get it, you could say. So that in and of itself is a good thing. And I'll just make a note for those, Mr. Quisenberry may have heard this before, but I don't imagine, I know Ms. Eisenman hasn't, and maybe Mr. Patterson hasn't, but this is the only facility like this in the county. Yeah, yeah. So we only have the one hotel motel license to approve, period. Ms. Petrie.
Yeah, I have a question of Mr. Hall. What is the distance between this motel and the Urbana boundary?
I believe it's adjacent. The property is adjacent to the municipal boundary, I believe.
So with a little luck, and northern movement of the
I
boundary.
suspect it would take a lot of luck for that to happen.
Okay.
Further discussion? Seeing none. Oh, Mr. Patterson.
Is this the Knights Inn? What hotel is it?
I think it's yeah.
Motel 5 or something?
Motel 6, I believe.
Yeah, east side of Cunningham, North Cunningham, before the 74. Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you, that passes. We will then move on to B, using enforcement fines to help offset the cost of adopting a building code. I'm open to having discussion first, if we'd rather have that, or if someone cares to make a motion first. Go ahead, Ms. Petrie.
Yes, I move that the money settlement on that property, which is what, 109? I'm quickly looking for the number here. 109,800 be used to facilitate the means for the county to move forward to research and establish a building code.
Is there a second? Mr. Hall, did you have something to say?
Yeah, as much as I appreciate that, the only thing that's asked for here as an action item is whether you want to see more information about the actual costs.
I know, I read it.
Okay.
I read it, and the county has needed a building code for a long time, and this is a good opportunity. So I would like to hear a discussion on the way I worded the motion and see if that will move things forward. But we do need to be doing this, and I believe you pointed out that we would have not have some of the many issues that your office has had to handle over time if we had had a building code in place. That includes Orchard. Yeah.
Does anybody care to second Ms. Petrie's motion? Do you have that, Tammy, or do you need Ms. Pete? Do you have it? Would you be able to repeat it back, please? Mr. Patterson would appreciate it, and I think maybe we all would, just to hear it one more time.
Ms. Petrie made a motion that the dollars, and she listed the amount, to be used to facilitate for the county to research and establish a building code.
Is that what? That, okay, just double checking, Ms. Petrie. Well, I'll go ahead and second it so that we can have some discussion. Or Mr. Quisenberry?
Yeah, John, how would this be different from the state code?
Well, we would enforce it. That's the biggest difference. The state code is not enforced, which I think, creates the unfortunate situation where if you buy a house constructed new after, and I think the state code went into effect in 2006, theoretically, it was subject to a building code, but is there any documentation of even what they agreed to build to? Because the builder and the owner are not required to build to the state code. They can build to another code, any code within 100 miles. So I think it's real questionable if it's doing any good at all. This would establish a code that would be enforced to some extent. Now, there's different levels of service that can be provided in enforcement of building codes. Obviously, higher level of service, more strict enforcement costs more. The other thing about the state building code, it applies to the building when it's built new. It doesn't require, there's no property maintenance code to go along with that over the years. And importantly, it doesn't have an existing building code component to go with it. I mean, I think it's good the state didn't throw all this in because there's no way to enforce it at all, period. Although I suppose you could enforce it through private action if you identified a building built after that date that was not built to an identified code. Maybe you could take private action, but that seems unlikely. So I think this is much different than the state adopting the codes that it did adopt. That being said, I mean, at least they did that much, but it doesn't really achieve much.
Okay, to follow up, and you have to take this with a grain of salt because I probably won't be here to see the results of this. I would be supportive of finding out what the cost would be as your memo actually asked for. But I would also want to know what the projected staffing and cost would be to do the inspections and then do the enforcement, because that's a layer that we're not currently doing. And that, in my mind, is probably the longer term, most expensive part of this. It wouldn't do to have a code that we then didn't have the staff to go inspect or enforce.
And so in the memo, I mentioned that, you know, adopting a building code and having staff to enforce it, you're going to quickly exceed $109,800. And the another important part about this is just the fact that the state's attorney's office was able to get those fines. They took the case to court. They set up a very fair process. It took an incredibly long time, but they actually got this much in fines. So good for the state's attorney's office. They recently hired another assistant state's attorney to help us with all of our cases, and he's getting right to it. So I doubt that we're going to have any other settlements this large, but I know we're going to have a lot more cases going to court.
Thank you.
Mr. Weibel.
Mr. Hall, could you tell me about how we're buying a building code? Not sure what you mean by that.
Well, that's literally what, we don't have the resources to develop a building code, but what we do is the same thing the city of Champaign did and the city of Urbana did. They buy a code from a reputable code.
Are there code sellers out there?
Absolutely. In fact, the biggest code seller is headquartered in the state of Illinois.
I mean, it's not like we could take, say, find another county, see if their code is and copy theirs, like we do, like people do all the time.
No, you
what's
actually.
What's the difference?
You actually have to pay to have a copy of the code to enforce it. And then you have to make modifications to it because it's just like the state code. The state adopted.
I understand the modifications, but the whole business of that we have to pay for it, like, that's different from anything else we've done.
Well, no, this was always part of the plan, was to.
We didn't have to buy like a wind farm ordinance.
That's
I don't think so.
That's correct. And some would say we didn't have the capability to develop a wind farm ordinance, but we did. But a building code is a different thing. I mean, you absolutely have to buy a reputable code to start with.
What you say is that it would save time than starting from scratch. Is that what that really comes down to? We can do it from scratch, but take a lot of time and money and probably cost us more?
To be legally defensible, that's
Okay,
what you have to do.
okay.
Ms. Petrie?
Okay, a couple of points. The reason that I have argued for a building code for a very long time is the problems that ensue when something is built and as the boundaries of the municipalities expand and it gets annexed into the municipalities. That presents long-range issues on that side. And as to the cost of doing this, I have already placed on the public record the argument that I hope the next board, as they do the 2020 budget, give serious consideration for another staff member for planning and zoning. I've pointed out many times that John's office is terribly understaffed. I compare it to the staffing in the city of Champaign, and they have 12 staff members. And now John will be up to 6, and another one seems quite appropriate for that office and the work in that office.
Further discussion on the motion, which
I
can
have a
be pretty, Mr. Patterson.
I'm just caught up on this paying for a code thing. So is it, like Pius said, with like we just did a solar ordinance, and we pretty much borrowed in other counties and tweaked it a little bit. What happens if we did that with a building code? Is that why is this different than other ordinances?
Well, first of all, you could be subject to a lawsuit if you did that. Secondly, anybody could challenge a code like that, because that's why you want it to come from a reputable code authority. All of these standards would have been thought through. Now, I don't want to make too much of this. These codes cost $65 to $100 per copy. You need to buy a couple of copies, and that comes with an agreement. So buying the code is actually probably the smallest cost in the whole process. I agree with Mr. Quisenberry. The real cost is identifying how much staff you need to achieve what you really want to achieve when you adopt the code, and that's the real cost.
Ms. Eisman, did you have a question? Okay. Ms. Petrie?
Okay. If we add up all of the time that the staff in John's office spent over all of those issues that we have faced over at least the 8 years I've been on the county board, this is a very inexpensive investment to finally put a building code in place. John's office on the buildings there in Thomasboro, that went on and on. We were in court. It was a mess. The things that he's now working on are taking a huge amount of time away from the time that he and his staff need to be spending on other issues for the county.
Mr. Goss?
Yeah, but am I not correct that the building code is from this point forward? Right. You can't enforce it on previous issues, so we've got...
That's one thing I want to report back to the committee about. Once you adopt an existing building code, I hadn't thought about this previously, but I believe that gives you some ability to require minimal maintenance on existing buildings. But for the most part, you are right. You adopt the building code, and then the property maintenance code goes along with it. But this is one thing I want to investigate to find out for myself. Is this going to be a benefit? The other thing is, I'm not saying that adopting a building code will reduce the amount of resources the county has to put into what my office does. It's only going to increase it. But hopefully, over the long run, there will be better results. That's the only reason I'm bringing this to your attention tonight. I think in the long run, there would be better results. But there's definitely a long-run cost.
Yeah, I guess my point is, I think the way it works in most places, you can't take a building code and go out and enforce it unless they come in and say, okay, we want to add something to this building. Now it has to fall under all existing building codes. So I think that's what you'll find. I mean, that's certainly what happens.
Well, I know the
old homes.
municipalities enforce standards on all buildings, even those buildings built long before they adopted building codes. So you have to do it carefully and judiciously. But if Champaign County had a building code, a property maintenance code, and an existing building code, I know we could be doing more than what we can do right now. It's just a matter of, is it worth the cost, I think.
Ms. Eisenman.
Can you give me like a specific example of if you put this building code into effect? Like, because Ms. Petrie had said that it would save you lots of hours and stuff you're working on. Can you just give me like an example of what that looks like?
I don't think it's going to save us hours for a long time, but for example, the Cherry Orchard apartment complex, we were in court for at least 3 years. We've been getting complaints for much longer than that. Now, Cherry Orchard was a rental property, so to deal with maintenance problems on a rental property, you really need a fourth component, which is a property inspection protocol, because with a rental property, you have to get in there to make sure it's being maintained. So it may have prevented Cherry Orchard from getting in the grossly dilapidated condition that it eventually was in. Specifically on the properties in Yankee Ridge that this settlement came from, this goes back to a building permit that was granted in the late 80s. And the nature of our zoning ordinance is that it never actually had to be completed. And so no one ever lived in it, and the property ran down. And we had been getting complaints from the 90s all the way through the beginning of this century. And that's why I felt it was so relevant to bring this to the committee. If we had had a building code, that situation would have been much better to begin with than it ever was. Again, if the owner chooses not to maintain the building, you're going to have an enforcement problem, even if you have a building code. So adding another thing to enforce is going to create more work. There's no doubt about that. But the hope is that 10 years from now, 15 years from now, our neighborhoods will be in a better condition because of it. Now, the old neighborhoods, Mr. Goss is right, there's only so much that adopting a code now can do, but I think it will help, and that's one thing I want to report back to this committee about.
I have one more question. So if they don't live up to the code, then what is their consequence?
Well, there would be an enforcement action. They'd get a letter from me saying, you know, your property isn't being maintained according to the code. We list the specific thing and make sure they know what to do. And if it's not done within a reasonable time, we refer it to the state's attorney.
No different than in the municipalities. No different than Muhammad. So, but we just haven't had one in the county, so things have gone on and on and on and on, and no leverage for enforcement.
Another benefit from adopting a code, you know, the state has adopted a commercial building code, and it applies to new buildings. It doesn't absolutely apply when someone is adding on to an existing building. And this has come up with some of the agricultural businesses around the county, chiefly an implement dealer that wanted to have a major expansion, and the size of spaces they needed to bring in combines and maintain the combines, I don't know if the code writers had never considered equipment like that and spaces like that, because they said, you know, this code is not going to work for us. Well, another cost of having a code is having a code board of appeals to deal with unusual situations that come up. Again, it's another cost. Hopefully it wouldn't be used that often, but we have already encountered one instance where a large implement dealer, the code just didn't work for him the way it was written. So in that instance, I decided we don't really have to apply this code to the building addition. So it didn't apply.
Further discussion. I guess I'd ask Tammy, could you read that back one more time, please? Just so that we know what we're voting on. Would appreciate it myself. Thank you.
Ms. Petrie motioned that the money, $109,800, be used to facilitate for the county to research and establish a building code.
Thank you. Okay, are we ready to vote? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Nay. The nays have it. Mr. Weibel.
I just want to point out, even though that motion failed, that does not prevent any members of the committee from making another motion that would give Mr. Hall direction like he was asking for in his memo.
Mr. Goss. Yes, thank you, Mr. Weibel.
Yeah, I was going to hope that you would indulge me to offer that motion up, that we use this money to at least start the research on what it would look like for a future building code.
Okay, so basically just what the...
Just the research.
The researching part of it. So, did you second it, Mr. Quisenberry? Seconded by Mr. Quisenberry. Discussion on this motion. The researching it only, basically. Without the facilitating, you could say. Enacting it. Seeing no discussion on that. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you, that passes.
Thank you.
Okay, we were on to section 9 now, items to be recommended to the county board. We have A, case 894-S-17, a request by Community Power Group, LLC, via agent Michael Brokowski, owner of Community Power Group, and participating landowners Aaron and Chris Soppett, to authorize a community photovoltaic solar farm special use permit on approximately 15.94 acres with a total nameplate capacity of 2 megawatts, including access roads and wiring in the AG1 Agriculture Zoning District. The subject property is a 57.84 acre tract in the west half of the northeast quarter of Section 12 of Township 19 North, Range 10 East of the 3rd Principal Meridian in St. Joseph Township, and commonly known as the property just north of the St. Joseph's Sportsman's Club. The following waivers of standard conditions are necessary. Part A, a waiver for a distance of 465 feet in lieu of 1/2 mile, 2,640 feet, between a municipal boundary and a photovoltaic solar farm per section 6.1.5 B2 of the zoning ordinance. Part B, a waiver for not providing a decommissioning and site reclamation plan that includes cost estimates prepared by an Illinois licensed professional engineer prior to consideration of the special use permit by the board per section 6.1.1A3. And Part C, a waiver for not entering into a roadway upgrade and maintenance agreement or waiver therefrom with the relevant local highway authority prior to consideration of the special use permit by the board per section 6.1.5G. Is there such a motion? Moved by Ms. Petrie. Seconded by Mr. Patterson. John, do you want to start this, say anything first, or?
Well, this is the first solar farm that you're seeing. We hope to be bringing 5 others by the end of the year. We had excerpted some testimony from the public hearing. It's on page 12 of the packet. The second bulleted paragraph repeats some testimony received from St. Joe Mayor Tammy Fruling Vogus at the September 27th hearing. St. Joe has the, I guess, unfortunate situation of having 3 of these small community solar farms proposed within a half mile of the village limits. These are all north of I-74. One is even north of the river. And so the St. Joe situation is, I think it's fair to say, a unique situation regarding the way the I-74 acts as a border currently. The expectation is that at such time as sewer gets extended across under the interstate, it won't be a barrier to development, but it isn't clear when that's going to happen. So the issue about, you know, the north side of the interstate being within a half mile of the village is a very unique situation. So the testimony of the mayor there on page 12 kind of explains some of the village's, what she believes the village thinking is. She made it real clear she can only speak, she doesn't speak for the village board, but she gave her understanding. The third bullet on that page is testimony from the vice president of the Sportsman's Club, who said that they are more than happy to have the solar farm at that location. And then the fourth bullet on that page is one of the 6 findings the board made regarding why this solar farm in that location, even with the waivers, is in accord with the general purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. And I'm not going to take time to read those. I will if you want me to. Regarding the waivers, as Mr. Borkowski explained at the beginning of the meeting, yes, there are waivers for the decommissioning and site reclamation plan and for the road agreement, but the special conditions require that those things be submitted and eventually approved by this committee. The reasoning being that if they could get the special use permit now, they're free to go ahead and pursue this lottery at the state for the renewable energy credits. If they're successful, they can come back at a time that's convenient for them, submit those documents. We would review them at a staff level and send them through this committee for final approval. I think that process would work great. And so there's several special conditions there. The ZBA spent a lot of time on those special conditions. That's all I have to say right now, unless there are questions.
Mr. Weibel.
John, when it comes to the voting on those documents later, does that just go to the committee, or does that also go to the county board?
We just go through this committee.
Okay, thank you.
Discussion, Ms. Petrie.
This folds into the discussion, but I want to put this out. I've written it to John, and as I said to John, I had never heard any of this discussed before. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention, but I do think we need to get this out on the table, and Mr. Borowski alluded to this. While I was at the Illinois State Urban Planning Conference last week, I did attend a session on planning law and solar panels, and did learn from the planning and zoning director of McLean County about this lottery system, which I wasn't aware of on the state. And McLean County already has 20 approved, and they're going to get 3 more approved, so they'll be putting 23 in. And Kankakee is putting 28 in. So you alluded to what's the percentage chance of getting picked out of this lottery, because if McLean and Kankakee are putting forth that many, I'm curious what other counties might be. Nobody has the answer. I'm just saying I'm curious because that's going to be a large number, and we don't know how the lottery will play itself out. So we go through all this effort of our work in our county, the other counties put forth all their work. If only one is chosen for a county or 2, and there are 20 put forth, or 23, or how many from us, 8, what's going to happen to the willingness of these developers to follow through on these projects if they don't get chosen for the lottery and the incentives aren't there? Do you have any insights on that, John?
I think it's unlikely they would proceed, but you have a developer here tonight. You could ask him his view on it.
Well, I would like to hear his view on it, and you sort of opened the topic by alluding to it as you were talking to us, and then I have some other questions to ask of the developer.
Yeah, I don't believe there'd be anybody objecting to hearing from Mr. Burkowski. So if you would please, Mr. Burkowski, if you could speak to that question.
So the lottery is broken into 2 territories, ComEd territory and rest of state. Rest of state excludes any territories that fall into co-op territory, which is a lot of southern Illinois. And so in the ComEd territory, there's approximately 650 applicants, of which about 66 will get selected. In Ameren territory, there's a similar number of applicants, 600 to 700, of which only about 30 will get selected. And so the odds are not spectacular. What I will say is that projects that get approved now and go into the lottery system will have preference as the community solar program is expanded in future years. So the Illinois Power Authority today has already indicated that there's likely additional budget for these solar farms, allowing the installation and the likes. So we would expect that in 2019 and beyond that the program will expand itself. So another thing to consider is that many of those projects will begin to fall out for a variety of reasons. One of those reasons is that these community solar lines connect to the grid at the distribution level. They connect into the 3-phase wires that run along the highway. Typically in a neighborhood, there's a single-phase wire, and a little bit more developed area, you'll see a 3-phase wire, which is basically a telephone pole, 3 wires at the very top of it. And so there's a lot of different types of 3-phase wires. There's smaller wires, there's bigger wires. Developers don't always know how much electric that particular wire can handle. And so of those 600-700 applications, many of those what has to happen is you put in an application to the utility. And the utility then provides you with their thoughts on the estimate to connect to the grid. And those costs largely driven by 2 things. One, the wire as it stands today may not be able to take all your solar, at which point you'd have to do electrical upgrades all the way back to a substation. Those facilities will likely never happen because that is a cost that cannot be absorbed by the economic benefits of a solar farm. That's number one. Number two is 3-phase wires are typically done in a circuit that run a fair number of miles. And each of those circuits can only handle so much solar power. You can only put as much power on there as is coming off. And so typically a lot of these wires can only handle one solar farm. And so oddly enough, in the instance of St. Joe, for instance, our particular project is first in queue. So each line has a queue. And a project gets queue number 1, queue number, the next project gets queue spot number 2, 3, 4, etc. So these other projects in St. Joe are actually behind our project. So if our project got built, those other 3 projects are highly less likely to get built because there may not be enough capacity in that wire to take these other solar farms. My point of all this is that there are a variety of factors that go into the actual implementation and construction of these solar facilities, such that 600 to 700 worth of facilities that are currently going through the process of being permitted today, even before taking into account the lottery or anything like that, many of those are just not going to get, are not feasible because the electrical infrastructure is not appropriate for the solar facility, and people don't really know the answer to that just yet. So that number probably gets chopped at least in half. So now we have the limited number that I discussed before, the expansion of the program. So I do think that it is very important for a project like ours to be able to be approved to be considered for the lottery. So I hope that was helpful.
Yes. Sorry, we didn't have some of that. It's not you who didn't give it to us, but I've gone to the ZBA hearings and I've never heard these kind of explanations. That's very important to learn this. So number 1 question is, I don't quite understand you being first in the queue. What explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, so 3-phase wires go in a circuit.
Right,
So
I
they
got
come
that.
out of a substation and they meander around a neighborhood and out into the country, and that's one whole line. And then all of a sudden they just stop. And that now fills up. So we put in an application, we're going to connect onto that particular circuit. Substation XYZ, circuit number 1. Anybody who proposes a solar facility along that same circuit
Okay, I got it. Okay.
now falls into a queue based on when you put your application in.
Sort of being at the end of the Comcast line. I got it now. All right.
That's right.
Okay. When you give us those numbers of applications, that's all you know about now. That's not the final number, is that right? It could be greater by the end of the year.
So they are no longer accepting interconnection applications. The cutoff was sometime in September. So anybody who comes to you today and says, "Oh, we're going to build a solar farm on your property," and you say, "Did you file an interconnect?" They say no. You say, "Okay, well, have a good day," because it's never going to get built.
Okay, all right. And so you get the lottery and you get this incentive from the state. This incentive from the state covers what percentage of the cost to build and put in place a solar farm?
– 15%, somewhere in that ballpark.
So if somebody were a huge gambler, 15% isn't that much. Somebody.
These projects have very thin margins. You cannot build it without.
Oh, it's that thin.
Yeah.
It's like the grocery store.
But there's another element.
Okay.
So the way these solar facilities were enabled in state legislation is that the community solar, which is different than the, say for instance, the much larger facility that you have slated. Community solar, which is less than 20 acres, generally speaking around 15 acres. The way they are able to sell their electric, or let's call it monetize their electric, is that These solar facilities have a meter on them, very similar to the one that you have on your house. The meter on your house spins to the right, and every month you get a bill. On a solar facility, it actually spins backwards, because instead of taking electric off the grid, it's putting electric on the grid. So as a solar facility owner, I, in essence, get a giant negative bill every month. And what the state has allowed us to do is sell those negative bills. So when there's a community solar garden in your area, how you would get the benefits of that is you would subscribe to a community solar garden. And you would say, I want $200 worth of credits a month. And every month you'd get your normal bill. Let's say it's $200. There's going to be a new line item on that bill, and it's going to say net meter credits. Net meter credits. And those net meter credits will go off to the right, and there'll be a negative $200. So now your ComEd bill is zero. When you subscribed to the community solar garden for those negative $200 or the net meter credits, we had an agreement, and that agreement says you'll pay, let's say, 80% or 80 cents on the dollar. So you would get a bill from us for $160 in that instance, representing a 20% discount on your electric bill. So that contractual mechanism is how we are able to monetize the electric from a solar facility. If you are not a community solar garden, if you are not selected in the lottery, you won't be able to do that.
So what you have taken the time to explain to us applies only to the community solar. It does not apply to the larger commercial one that's going to be 1,300 acres, right?
That's right. The
Okay.
larger commercial, I won't go into it. You don't need to know.
Okay, all right. Thanks. Thank you very much. I appreciate your help.
Further questions for Mr. Borkowski while we have him in front of us, or discussion in general? Ms. Eisenman?
Hi there. I have a couple of questions for you. The first one is, what are your PV panels made of? I was reading there were several different options.
That's a great question, Ms. Eisman. So when you go and you Google PV solar, one of the first things that pops up is all the dangerous chemicals inside of them, something called cadmium. Cadmium is a component that is inside a solar panel called thin film. Thin film panels that are called thin film PV panels, they will almost certainly not be used in the state of Illinois. They're primarily used in the southern states for a variety of different reasons. Our solar panels will be polycrystalline. Polycrystalline doesn't have cadmium or those other dangerous chemicals. And I always think I should bring an example, but if I can give you a quick example of what they look like, I think you'll really appreciate it. Oh, yes. So let me give you the visual here just for a minute, and then we can look at that.
Thanks, Jim.
So what you can't see with this, that I find truly beneficial, this is, in all fairness, an older solar panel. They're a little bit, they're made a little bit differently. But this right here is a really firm plexiglass like you would have on your back door, you know, on your screen door, where you have that really, really good plexiglass. This is a really great quality one of those. And they basically have one on the front and one on the back. And in the middle are these little wafers. And these little things are tiny little wires like you would have in any kind of circuitry type thing. And so a thin film, this wafer has that cadmium inside of it. This is a solar PV panel, or polycrystalline panel, where it's just these regular wafers which don't have any type of dangerous chemicals inside them at all. They're also made such that you can see some people talk about the fires. There's not much here that's really able to burn, or that's very flammable. The other component to this is the way these solar facilities will work is that these panels will ever so slowly rotate throughout the course of the day. So they're actually going to be facing, if I'm directionally right, this feels about east that way to me right now. And they ever so slowly go like this throughout the course of the day. And at their height, they're about 6.8 feet off the ground. So they're not very high. They don't make any noise. That plexiglass is not like if you get a 3-inch piece of hail, it really just like your back door. It doesn't break. And so they're pretty. It's a pretty benign technology. But that was a great question, and I'm sorry if I elaborated too much about.
I do. I just have two quick
Yes, go ahead.
clarifications. So is that and I'm not going to pronounce it right, the CADIUM, is that cadmium?
Cadmium,
Is that present
yes.
in them, in your
No,
panel?
not
It's
in a
in yours at all?
polycrystalline, no.
Okay. And then is there any lead oxide in your glass at all?
Not that I'm aware of. It's more of a plexiglass-oriented material. I don't believe there is, but I cannot confirm that answer for you.
I couldn't, I turned 40, so I couldn't read any of this, of what it's made out of, and so I even had my glasses, and yeah.
Oh.
That's good, yeah.
Sorry about that.
Can't see one thing on it, so.
Yes.
Wanted to clarify that. And then I do have one other question, and I know that it's a debate right now with environmentalists that renewable energy development and the reduction of greenhouse gases is very important, but so is the conservation of habitats and all of the species and all of that. And farming has been my lifeline. It's my husband's line of work and my father's, and on all sides of my family. And so lots of people move to the country because they want to be out of the city and they want to enjoy the beautiful scenery and all of that. And so my greatest concern is, because I go for walks every morning and every evening because it's beautiful, I would not enjoy going for a walk. And I used to live in St. Joe, walking, and I know it's by the interstate. I actually live by the interstate, but to walk by them, I know that you're going to plant trees and things around it. Are there other things you're going to do to preserve the habitat that was there?
Yeah, so again, a great question. I think one of the important characteristics of the placement of this particular facility is that I would be probably more, for this particular facility, I'd probably be more concerned about the highway and the shooting range that doesn't have any kind of open, like you would not want to walk in that area.
Oh yeah, not by the interstate. I'm just thinking you have more coming, and so I'm thinking down that
Yeah,
line.
totally, and I think that's why being thoughtful about the strategic placement of these facilities, because I do think that that's a consideration for sure. I personally love the country and being out in the area, and I think there's a great place for solar and there's a not so great place for solar. And that's one of the reasons we very specifically chose this spot, because we don't believe that it would provide any interruptions to your exact thoughts.
What provisions are you making though for the habitat that are currently living in the field?
It is a farmed field right now, where there really is no habitat on this particular field, no wildlife. And the other component to that, so there's two components to that. One is we're going to be creating habitat because it will have a pollinating friendly seed mix. So we will be creating a bee-oriented and insect-oriented environment where no chemicals will be used that would otherwise be harmful. So if we started at the smallest end of the food chain, I think we'd actually be supporting that habitat. And then, you know, see where we do provide screening and the likes on the projects, that also provides cover and habitat where it doesn't currently exist for larger animals and wildlife.
Okay, thank you.
I was just going to point out that this particular solar farm is not close enough to any residences to require, according to the ordinance, to require any screening. So this one would just have a fence around it and nothing else. I mean, not going to say that should the developer choose to put screening around it of some kind, they could. There's nothing to keep them from it, but that'd be another expense that I don't imagine they'd be looking to put into it.
The other thing too is, for the majority of our solar fields, we have a game fence as opposed to a chain link fence, which typically we have to ask for because most ordinances require a chain link fence. We have a lot of solar facilities throughout the state, so I don't remember. I believe we always ask for it. If you guys may be silent as to what exact type of fence, but we do. We think a game fence is much more appropriate in these settings. So.
I don't think we call for a chain link fence, Michael.
Yeah, so then our construction plans have a game fence on it. And a game fence, just for clarification, is where, you have a typical wooden post, and then you have the larger mesh fencing. That's just so much more natural for, the rural Illinois setting versus a chain link fence.
In other words, something like a rabbit or something could easily pass through.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they don't pose a risk to wildlife. So.
Ms. Petrie?
Since you're doing such an excellent job of explaining things, one more question that I learned while I was at the conference, that a modus operandi of these solar dealers is to break up a large project into the smaller size of what is defined as the community solar. First of all, is that accurate information? And if it is accurate information, secondly, does that up that number that you quoted to us? And that's what is happening, and that's why that number is so large.
Got it. So that is a good question, and it's an appropriate question. So generally speaking, and I'll do this very quickly, and inside the state of Illinois, you'll see 4 types of projects. Generally speaking, you'll see one is on rooftops of homes. A next one is on rooftops of buildings, or maybe some ground mount right around a building where they're going to actually use the electric on site for whatever activities they're conducting inside that business. And then that leaves 2 other types of facilities. One is a community solar garden, and one is your much larger scale, like the 13-acre one. I highly doubt you'll see any projects that are anywhere between the 20-acre and the several hundred-acre. There isn't a market, there isn't a real opportunity. Any developer who comes to you with that probably isn't maybe fully informed. What I will say, which is the question that you raised, which is a very important one, is that the way the legislation was originally written is that you could only have one community solar garden per commonly owned parcels, and that you couldn't subdivide for the purpose of having more than one. So at the last second...
Can I ask a real quick question? Because it goes to what I wondered. This is not very many acres. The land is many more, you could put another one there. So you're answering, okay.
Yeah, so I'm gonna, but it's slightly more complicated, and it's a nuance that I think is very important for the board, because I know you do have what's called co-located projects inside your area. So at the last second of the state's interpretation, they said, we want to make sure that this program is a success and that there's plenty of people that are putting applications in for community solar gardens. Well, guess what? There are plenty. We already have no shortage of them. But they did allow a co-located facility. So you're allowed to have 2 on one site. Our particular firm did not think that was appropriate. We didn't think it was in the spirit of the state legislation, which emphasizes geographic diversity. We have not developed any of our projects from a co-located perspective. And quite frankly, above probably our moral authority on that, we actually think that they're just going to get nixed out because the program is so oversubscribed that nobody's going to allow 2 facilities on one location. And so they did put in a slight penalty where if you do locate 2 on one penalty, your recs are worth a little bit less. The economies of scale of co-building them are less than the actual penalty. So even if both of them got located, it's worthwhile to relocate to a different location.
Thank you very much again.
Yes.
Didn't come on. Any further questions or discussion? Anything you want to add, John, at this point in time? Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Murkowski. Appreciate it. Being the first, I'm not going to say we won't have hard questions for any developers to come later, but you definitely had a bit of maybe a harder job just educating us on some of the basics, you could say, that will come in handy later on. Okay, without seeing any further discussion, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. I believe I heard 4-2, so it passed. No, not going to be on the consent agenda. Okay, we are then on to B, case 897-S-1A. Oh, and also just before, real quick, thanks to you, Mr. and Mrs. Soppett, for being here and being available. Okay, move on then to B, case 897-S-18, a request by Community Power Group LLC via agent Michael Borkowski, owner of Community Power Group, and landowners Thomas and Deborah Sutter, to authorize a community PV solar farm of 16.23 acres in area with a total nameplate capacity of 2 megawatts, including access roads and wiring in the AG1 Agriculture Zoning District. The subject property is a 36.77 acre tract in the west half of the northwest quarter of Section 20 of Township 22 North, Range 9 East of the 3rd Principal Meridian in Ludlow Township, and commonly known as the farmland adjacent to the electric substation on the southeast corner of the intersection of County Road 3300 North and County Road 1300 East. The following waivers of standard conditions are necessary. Part A, a waiver for not providing a decommissioning and site reclamation plan that includes cost estimates prepared by an Illinois licensed professional engineer prior to consideration of the special use permit by the board per section 6.1.1A3. And Part B, a waiver for not entering into a roadway upgrade and maintenance agreement or waiver therefrom with the relevant local highway authority prior to consideration of the special use permit by the board per section 6.1.5G. Is there such a motion? Moved by Ms. Petrie, seconded by Mr. Patterson. Discussion on this one, or John, do you want to speak to this one? Anything special?
This is not within half a mile or even within 1.5 miles of any municipal boundary. This is truly a rural setting. we had one person that came to the hearing with some questions for the first meeting, but as you saw on the location map, there's only a few houses, and that was one of the people who spoke, and that person's main concern really was to make sure it was not going to interfere with farming on their land, and we had no evidence indicating that was the case. So I'm happy to say that at the second meeting, no one even came to the hearing, so this was a much easier one.
Discussion on this one, or did we get most of it taken care of during the first case? What's that, what page it's on? 41, begins on 41. But again, it's Mr. Borkowski again, so same group. Give everybody a few minutes to. Oh, Mr. Goss.
Yeah, has it been decided? I know this one's one that kind of, you've got Eastern Illinois Electric and Illinois, or Ameren. Walk me through that, because obviously EIEC is a cooperative and is not eligible. I mean, I guess
So that
I
is
read that and I couldn't quite understand it.
That is a well-read question. Kudos to you. So this is in co-op territory. It is Eastern Illini's area. Eastern Illini gets all their power from Prairie Power. Eastern Illini is a distributing co-op. Prairie Power is your essential electric supply co-op to the co-ops. In the original legislation, co-ops were allowed to participate. In the secondary ruling, it was further deemed that they were allowed to participate. And then ComEd sued the Illinois Power Authority to disallow the co-ops. And so I've had extensive conversations with Eastern Illini and Prairie Power. And so what I agreed to do is we'd undergo the expense of continued development of the project in the event that they prevail in the lawsuit and it does become eligible, that we would then be able to have this project available for them. But it was, yeah, spot on.
Further discussion. Go ahead, Ms. Eisman.
So my question is, so the only residence is this yellow place right here on the map by this one? Is that right? Residential.
Sorry. Actually, the better map to view residences is on page 66.
Oh, I didn't go far enough. Okay.
And there are 2 residences within 1,000 feet. And so this solar farm will have to have some screening.
Okay.
Obviously, the presumption is there will be farming occurring on the rest of the property, so the screening is, it could actually, the ordinance actually allows the farmland to be part of that screening if the neighbors are supportive of that. I think that is yet to be determined, actually. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, and then I don't know, do Christopher and Aaron, do you actually live, like, on,
This is
you just own it?
This is the second one. The Sutter, I believe, they aren't here
Mr.
tonight.
Sutter is not here
Oh.
right now, so the landowner
So-
is not here.
Okay. Okay, I thought that they own the St. Joe land then?
Yeah,
Okay, I got it.
Mr. and Mrs. Hoppett were the
Oh,
one for the St. Joe
Okay.
that we approved. Ms. Petrie.
I'm interested in your last statement about the co-op and that it is not allowed. So it's a calculated risk for you to go through all of this and an investment that just maybe the statute will be changed. You must have some reason to think there's a high probability of that happening? What is it?
All of a sudden, I feel like maybe I shouldn't go to Vegas. I really don't. We started developing this when it was allowed, and it was we had the land contract, and so I actually don't. I don't know, but I made a commitment to the landowner that I would take this all the way through and give it the best shot it had of getting done, and therefore that's where we are.
Anything else? Seeing no more discussion or questions, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you. That was approved. We'll keep it off the consent then, Patsy.
Thank
no
you all
problem.
very much.
Thank you, Mr. Burkowski, again for your explanation and time. And again, to you, Mr. and Mrs. Soppet. Appreciate it. Okay, we're now to 10, other business. We
Mr.
have,
Azri, I would like to ask,
Mr. Quisenberry.
Ms. Petrie, would you like to change your vote to no?
We can just ask,
Okay.
keep it off. Yeah, no problem. Not a problem. Okay, we are now to 10, other business, the semi-annual review of closed session minutes, which the state's attorney's office, Mr. Quisenberry. Yeah.
Under the advice of the state's attorney, I would move that we keep the closed session minutes from the last 6 months closed.
Thank you. Is there, seconded by Mr. Goss, discussion on that? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you, that passed. Chair's report, I have nothing for that for this month. Designation of items to be placed on consent agenda would be nothing. And if there is no objection, oh, go. That's approved by ELUC, straight out of the committee. So, not a problem. Yep, not a problem. So without objection, we're adjourned. Thank you.